Okay. Let me get situated here. Great to see everyone. And this summer day, summer evening. So our topic for this evening is dealing with, actually the way it was worded was dealing with violence and trauma as we tread the spiritual path. This is really bringing it to the nitty-gritty of walking the spiritual path, because there is trauma and there is violence that we encounter, and we have to find a way. We have to find a way to deal with those things, not just to survive them, but really to not let them disrupt our spiritual unfoldment. And even more than that, to use that experience to advance our spiritual unfoldment. So that's our topic for the night. And I assume that each of you is, in your own particular way, treading the spiritual path or a spiritual path. And so I'm sure that most of you can relate to this challenge, what this topic represents. And I'd like to start by hearing your thoughts on your experiences in terms of how you've dealt with trauma and violence as you have been treading your spiritual path. So if anyone, whoever, I shouldn't say anyone, I should say whoever would like to share something about that experience would help us all land into this topic. So yeah, as Carol said, unmute yourself and say your name, and then let us hear from you. Okay, so I'm going to do a little more of a lead in, because I feel like people are sort of like, what are you talking about? And so to be more descriptive and explicit, we are living in a time when there is a lot of violence, and sorry. And you may not have thought of it that way, but if you stop and consider what you see on the evening news or here on the radio, or the things that happen that aren't on the news and on the radio, in terms of wars, many of which we are playing some significant role, the violence that happens with people who are don't have a leg up, but have challenges in life, who are low income or racial issues or whatever. People being evicted from their homes, people being struggling to have food. I know in Western North Carolina, we have a very high incidence of people who really don't have food. The food insecurity of something like 2 out of 5 children are living in households that does not have food security. In other words, they often don't know where the next meal is coming from. So that's traumatic, but that's also, in some sense, violence. You know, from if the communities of people that we are can't make sure that people have something to eat, then there's some kind of violence going on there, whether it's conscious or unconscious. What's being done to the environment is certainly very intense violence, with the destruction of the aquifers being drained, people watering their lawns. So, you know, the intensity of toxic materials being put into the environment year after year after year after year that are accumulating and leading to widespread illness. And most of this that I'm saying is clearly documented, but not necessarily talked about in the evening news. But I can, those of you who know me are aware that I can speak eloquently on the subject about Roundup, which is still being sprayed down on sides of roads. I go down often. And I'm sure that I'm breathing it. And Roundup is now, glyphosate is now recognized as a carcinogen, but it's much more than that. And so the violence that it's doing to us, not only our health, but to the health of the soils, which is making our food crops essentially, well, almost absent of nutritional value. And these things are not being talked about, but we feel them, we see them, we know they're happening on some level. And that is an act of violence committed by us collectively that affects each of us individually. Many people are aware of the violence that we have done, which is affecting the climate, and we're feeling that, though there is certainly a widespread attempt to minimize it or explain it away. So, you know, this is just the tip of the iceberg. And when we look at so many of our institutions, whether it's educational or medical or whatever, they involve an inordinate amount of violence in terms of how we treat children who don't learn like other children, or how we deal with illness, giving drugs that are highly toxic and cause hundreds of thousands of deaths every year. And yet that's the first response, is to prescribe these medications. So this is all woven into the way we're living. And it's, we manage with the help of the media to be unaware of it a lot of the time. But as we tread the spiritual path, we begin to be more sensitive. We begin to see things more clearly. And then what do we do with that? What do we do with that information? What do we do with those realizations? How do we avoid denial and yet remain serene enough to pursue our practices, our meditation, our yoga, whatever we do in spiritual practice, So these are not trivial questions. And I would venture to suggest that everyone here has encountered some of these challenges. So the violence that we experience, whether it's direct or indirect, can leave us deeply affected, and that can affect our capacity to tread the spiritual path. So, most of you have heard about PTSD, and there are certain concepts we have about PTSD, but if you delve into the topic, you would discover that it's much more than someone who's been traumatized by serving in the military, or someone who's been subject to rape or some kind of other criminal violence. So we are all often traumatized, and we have learned to minimize it and ignore it. And yet it affects our capacity to be alert and to be aware. That's why it's so directly relevant to the spiritual path. So, this discipline of helping people with PTSD has just expanded and expanded. And we're realizing more and more how many people are suffering from trauma that they had poo-pooed and forgotten about, or tried to forget about, because that's what we're rewarded for doing in society. It's like, okay, just don't let it bother you, move on. And so we say, okay, I won't think about it. But yet it affects us in ways that limit us in an unconscious fashion. So violence and trauma do not sound like the perfect place to pursue a spiritual path. Yet that's what we're really living in. And if we don't acknowledge it, then we can't really address the limitations it's causing within us. So they used to say, when ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise, but maybe that's not true. And maybe ignorance really isn't bliss anyway, because denial and suppression and repression are not totally comfortable. It's a sort of superficial way of coping. So, so who would like to share a little bit about your experience with trauma, or the after effects of trauma, or your concern with or being disturbed by systemic violence, which is what we call the violence that shows up in racism, for example. Great, Arabelle. Thank you.
So I'll just lead with a few thoughts, and maybe your conversation and mine will help people put things together. For me, it's violence. I think sometimes we have different views of violence. We don't actually understand what it is we're talking about. We think, well, I'm living okay. I have enough to eat. I'm not experiencing violence. And I think that the definition of violence is really important. And I'd invite you to talk about that a little bit. But when I am experiencing, there is hunger in my community. So when I am aware of that, I can make a definite effort in that regard to help address the needs of the hungry in my community. But I think stepping back, because you're talking about this in the context of our spiritual path, the realization that our spiritual path is everything that we experience, including the violence. And for me, the principle of Tantra that I keep coming back to is as within, so without. So if there is violence, how is that reflected in my internal being? How does my internal being then reflect out into the violent community? How can I contribute to the maturation and the wisdom and the peacefulness and the joy of life if my own internal landscape is just riveted with and is a virtual minefield? So one thing that I noticed very long time ago when we first started talking about violence, or when I first started thinking about it, was that the greatest violence I do to myself is the word should. Should sets up all these expectations and opportunities for failure. So I began to eliminate that word from my vocabulary entirely. And every once in a while, I'll slip up and say it. And if I say it and the students around, they'll say, Arabella, don't say should. So I know I'm a little random right now, but I just wanted to give some input and thoughts, and now I'll let others.
Yeah, thank you. That's great, because it does come back eventually to, I mean, the starting place really comes back to what violence am I doing to myself? And you might think, well, I don't know, wouldn't do violence to myself. But there's so many things that we do that we think, well, this is probably not so good for me, but doesn't matter. And we eat it, or we do it, or we think it. Even the thoughts that we're running in our minds, we really are in charge of those thoughts. We don't have to think them if we don't want to. How many thoughts that we think create emotion in us that's violent? And that's like all the time. So we need to look within to really appreciate the foundation of all the violence, which is people doing violence to themselves. And I don't really know of anyone this day and time who isn't doing that. As far as I can tell, I'm not in people's heads, I'm just in my own head. But I'm sure that I observe the violence that I do to myself. And it's not, this is a topic and a perspective that has not been popular and not part of the mainstream conversation. Because those things we just accept as normal. And things that are the norm are not necessarily normal. They're just what everybody's doing. So yeah, that's the place to start. That's a good place to start. And it will lead us, I think, to cleaning up a little bit of what's going on inside of ourselves. Because part of the reason for the unawareness is that we've done enough violence to ourselves by, for example, sitting in front of television, watching people machine gun each other down. That's like not unusual if we watch the average run of television. Or, the things that are called entertainment are often shake us in a very subtle but profound way with their violence. And we have a choice as to whether to expose ourselves to that or not. And we think, oh, well, this looks like it's interesting, let me watch that. So that there's a degree of normalization of violence in our culture that we just accept. Oh, well, they drone attacks in the Middle East. Well, I don't know what that is all about. so I don't need to think about it. But actually, I do. And, you know, there's some kids, I say kids, but some young men in DC in a laboratory kind of setting, pushing the buttons like it's a video game and killing people. Well, that's our government, and our represents us. That they're acting in our name to do these things. And so we manage to not think about it. We manage to ignore it. And that is actually doing violence to us, to ourselves. Because on some level, despite our attempts to deny it or ignore it, on some level, it's hurting us. We feel the impact of that on a very deep level. And so, you know, I mean, I could go through hundreds of different scenarios that involve violence that are just customary and accepted, and that we ignore. So in order to change that, we have to have the inner awareness and capacity for exploring ourselves that we may not have at this point because of all the violence that we've absorbed kind of without paying attention. So it kind of gets covered up because we become numbed. You might say numbed, but the numbed is part of the post-traumatic stress reaction, you know, to sort of freeze or you know, become impervious to what's happening around us. Yes, George. Did you?
Hi, this is George.
Yeah.
Couple of things have come up for me. One is that, at least for me, it's acknowledging the voices, the self-destructive voices, and then realizing that, okay, violence was done to me when those voices were planted. That at some level, you know, I didn't come up with them of my own. They were things that reflected what someone else said and I took in. And going a couple of different ways with this. One is my increased understanding these days that off committing that violence, they were in fact acting out violence that was done to them. Right. And then also owning for myself that the violence that was done to me led me to perform similar violence to my own sons and others around me.
Right.
And, you know, really coming to be aware of that and taking ownership of it seems to me critical to my spiritual path.
Absolutely. That's very true. That's very helpful for all of us to hear that. Thank you for that example, because something happens when we observe and accept the truth about what's happening. Something new happens that shifts something on a very profound level. It's not like I have to run out and do something about it, but if I acknowledge to myself that, oh my God, look, I was doing this, then I'm no longer the same person. Something has happened, something has changed. It's the denial and that really keeps us locked into place. But you wanted to add something?
Yes, just it was my birthday a couple of years ago now that my oldest son said to me, because I was doing my work, it made space for him to do his.
Yeah, right. So yeah, so there's immense benefit from acknowledging things and seeing them clearly. And that's, in fact, I would say that is probably a major part of the spiritual path. It's sort of like, these are the things that weight us down, even if we pretend that they're not there, or we ignore them, or we disown them, or we don't want to know about them. But as we see them and realize that, yes, oh gosh, that is something I have done, then it's like throwing sandbags out of the balloon, and we start moving upwards, and everything looks different. we have a place from which to observe. But we're weighted down by what we deny. And so treading the spiritual path is really, this is an essential and very central part of that process. We think it's meditating, but if we really sit for meditation and go deeply, that's when we can make these connections and have these insights and understand more. Yes, I'm sorry, I can't see your, oh, Joseph? Is it Joseph?
Thank you. Thank you so much. These days, for me, what's really interesting with my own work in meditation and is kind of getting to the root of things. And from what I understand, all human conflict derives from ignorance of our true nature. And like any kind of conflict at all, that's the root of it, is ignorance of who we truly are. And it seems to be, at least for me, from my point of view, more and more clear to me these days that there's really only one consciousness, and it's having this like multiplicity of experiences here on Earth as humans and animals and rocks and trees and whatever. But somehow there has been a separation, some kind of separation has happened. And so we think that everyone else is an other, and we are other to ourselves. And like as a species, we're other to this planet, and we're all alone and blah, blah, blah. So like separation, and then ignorance of what we truly are. And then it just kind of snowballs out from there. So for me, it's been very interesting to be more conscious, like throughout the day, of like, remember your true nature, remember your true nature. And every person you see is really just you. And then what goes back to you and what Arabella were saying about how the change will be, it seems it will be more effective when it starts from inside the person and ripples out from there. Because the violence we see in the outside world is really a projection of what is happening inside. So that's what I've been working with these days.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right on the button. That, we do, it is not our true nature to be violent. But then the isolation, the separation, the belief in separation, and then the living as though we're separate individuals is really the foundation for violence. The idea that, well, I want that for me is assuming that I'm separate. If I say I want that for us, then it's a whole different kind of effect on us as individuals and on those around us. So, or as one old guy said in Texas, we all do better when we all do better. It's not like I'm competing with others. It's like we all But this is not what we grew up on. We grew up on a philosophy that, well, you got to take care of number one, and you got to make sure you get your share and a little bit more, because who knows what will happen. And we go for that, then we're causing us suffering in ourselves as well as in the world. So yes, thank you for that sharing.
Rudyji, I believe there's someone named Greg who has been wanting to speak.
Oh, good. I see Greg. Hi, Greg.
Yeah. Hello. Yeah, no, it is, a lot of this resonates with what others are sharing. And for me, I've been doing a lot of work looking at studying my own mind, and yes, the true nature of the oneness of everyone and everything. And particularly looking at dismantling my own white supremacy and looking at how harm and violence I've done to people of color, and by thoughts, actions in my life. So I'm working in other circle settings to kind of work with that. It's really deep work, and that's kind of how I'm using it to really own my part of that, and to like create a more like unified world, and to be in harmony more with that oneness. One of the things I'm most present with right now is around the trauma of COVID and the heightened anxiety that I've been feeling as this is dragging on, and the isolation and separation. I like the fact that we globally have been taught to fear other human beings, like that they could kill us by breathing the same air, has just been an ongoing thing for me, and trying to relate to community and being in person with people who are close to me. And I get caught in wondering like if I'll ever feel safe enough to like go to a yoga class indoors someday, or even hugging close friends and family indoors. And it's just I'm trying to work with that. I haven't quite connected that situation to my spiritual path as far as where I'm at with it, or where that piece is, like how to really work with that, other than not catastrophizing about the future, and really bringing myself back to the present and moment to moment, and not isolating like deliberately, and sort of challenging myself in certain ways. But it's traumatic, I would say.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, we're having this pouring rain here, so the only way I can hear is to put the speaker next to my ear. Yeah, this is really it is a challenging time, because all the things, what we're talking about, the need for community and collaboration and so forth is kind of being thwarted by the restrictions that are imposed. And so that makes it particularly difficult. But I guess that if we can learn to be together under those circumstances somehow, that then we will be much more advanced in our understanding that we're not alone. But it's really being challenged. We're being challenged on that point. So thank you for sharing that. Anyone else have?
Hi, Swami Ravi.
Yes.
Yes, this is Tom. Hi, I'm calling in from New Hampshire. And I don't often speak on these calls because I'm not sure I've earned the right yet to speak on these calls, but I'm alive, so I guess I have earned the right. Right. But yeah, this topic hits really home, and the earlier shares are really, really hit home, because the first thing that came to my mind when I saw the topic was the violence I've done to myself. and the violence in some ways I continue to do to myself as I go down this spiritual path. And my spiritual path has been littered with landmines, and the vast majority of them are planted by myself, you know, and they go back to my childhood. I understand that now. They go back to childhood traumas and violence and so forth. And in my life, I've so badly wanted not to pass that on to anybody that I've just turned it inward on myself. So, you know, I just inflict violence on myself. In my younger days, it was physical. In my older days, now it's all, you know, emotional or mental. But it seems as I go down a path and I taste a little bit of sweetness or a little bit of the goodness, I have the voice inside me that yells at me that I don't deserve it. And then it takes it away. Then I taste the bitterness. And I do that self-sabotage over and over again. So that's what came to my mind when I saw the topic. And I'm glad to hear some earlier shares on that as well, because it makes me feel at home and makes me, you know, a little bit more peaceful in my heart. So thank you.
Yes, yes. So what you're saying is actually not uncommon. And this is just an indication of the state of our culture, you know, what we have collectively created, that is our ways of living and thinking that are really very violent to ourselves. And so part of the spiritual path is really becoming aware of that. And, you know, we think, well, now that I'm aware of it, just another thing I have to do something about, I'm overwhelmed. But no, it's not really. It's just, if you become aware of it, the awareness transforms things.
Right.
And so I think we kind of rationalize and say, well, God, I don't want to become aware of all these things because I can't do anything about them. But if you can just become aware of them, that is doing something about it, and then your awareness shifts and your piece of the collective consciousness of the planet is changing. And so this work is really valuable, and its effects are radiating out everywhere, even though it's something that just happens inside of your mind. So our courage, which I'm hearing so much of, courage of acknowledging what I've done, what I've been doing to myself, the courage to acknowledge that is a powerful thing. And it's accomplishing something, not just for us, but on the whole broad sphere of planet Earth. So good, that's great. I'm grateful to you for the work you've done within yourself.
Thank you.
Right. So the one of the is that sort of referred to the kind of double bind we get into is, well, I need to be more aware, but actually my awareness is being undermined by the traumas I've had in the past and my reactions to it. So I'm kind of caught in a trap. But that's where yoga and meditation provide a really important solution or important way of dealing with that. And that's with the breath. So it turns out that now researchers are saying that a lot of the post-traumatic stress syndrome is a result of how our autonomic nervous system reacts to the stressful event. And the fact that we are totally unconscious, that all happens unconsciously, and how we are more cerebral impulses are to not be aware of that, push it down out of awareness and not react to it and not let it, quote, not let it bother us. So we have a collection of those things that have been suppressed, and they are disturbing us and limiting our awareness. So yoga has a solution, and it's called pranayama, and this particular aspect of working with the breath. And that is that if the response to previous trauma is actually going on in our physical organs, like the digestive tract and the heart and the lungs, and that the influence of the trauma on those organs actually feeds back into our body, and that we get even more upset and emotionally disturbed. So that can change as our awareness increases in clarity, and we can begin to see what's happening. But if our awareness is clouded, then it's a catch-22 or caught. So you can make your awareness more clear by adjusting your breath. And how do we do that? Well, if we inhale to a count of 3, and then we exhale to a count of 6, that increases the vagal tone, and that brings calmness and clarity into our consciousness. So this is a way of dealing with somatic disturbances that we can't really bring into our awareness. They're going on and they're limiting us, but we've got a handle on it. We can't really see it. We don't know what to do about it. So what we can do about it is we can directly influence the autonomic nervous system by extending the exhalation longer than the inhalation. We do that in meditation. Don't try to do it out in the world when you're busy. Maybe eventually you could try that. But at the beginning, it's just when you're meditating. So you inhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then exhale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That means I'm stretching the exhalation out, and the inhalation, I'm not doing that. And that increases the vagal tone. The heart calms down. The internal organs begin to, their disturbance begins to subside. And that circle, that vicious circle of the disturbance in the organs, making us feel more upset, more emotional, and then the organs get more disturbed. We break that cycle, and then we're sitting in a kind of peaceful, serene space where we can observe what's going on in ourselves. And we can then accept that and allow that awareness to be part of what we now have on a regular basis. So this is a very simple technique. The actual neurophysiology of it is a bit more complicated than I'm explaining to you right now, but you don't have to know all of that. You can just do the technique, extending the exhalation, and that actually changes the whole autonomic balance, which has everything to do with our emotions and how we feel and what we can remember and what we can see clearly and what we can't. So it's a shortcut. It's very simple. Anybody have any questions about that? So my suggestion to you is try it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Try it and see how it feels. And you might want to introduce that into your meditative practice. So you may do other things for a while, but then maybe you do 5 minutes at the beginning of just that kind of breath, where you double the time of inhalation with your exhalation. And then if you can stay with that and you find it helpful, you can go up to 10 minutes at a time. And then eventually you might choose to do a significant part of your meditative time, just doing that breath and seeing what emerges into your awareness. Because things will emerge more clearly into your awareness, because you will be more tranquil, more serene, and more able to accept and observe things without feeling defensive. So, good. I offer you that to play with and see what happens. And actually, next week we'll do a little. Are we going to do it next week? Is that the time I have the other thing? Yeah. Well, I think I'm not sure whether we will be doing this next week. Might, or maybe it's the week after. I think it's next week. But we will be sending you an announcement when we do the meditation, which will be either next week or the week after. Okay. I guess our time is about up. Anybody have a last minute comment or sharing or question? Yes, Linda.
Well, so Linda Bark, so I would just like to say that tomorrow is your 80th birthday, and I would love to celebrate that with everyone by singing a ridiculously silly song. I know it's going to really sound weird because we're not going to be together exactly, but for me, it's just a way of sending you my love, and maybe other people will join in to sing happy birthday. Ready, everybody? So you have to unmute.
Happy birthday. Woo.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Rudyji. Happy birthday to you. Thank you for being my teacher and alive and in my life.
Yes, thank you. The same for being our teacher and in my life.
That was
Happy birthday.
beautiful chaos. Thank you. Okay, I will turn this over.
Gosh, how do I top that? Anyway, next week, let's see, the date of next week is the 22nd.
Second.
Yeah, I think you have something scheduled. So we'll be sending out an announcement and let you know what's happening. It'll be a meditation next, as Swami Ravi mentioned. And the other thing I wanted to say is you can find all of these tonight and all of our recent, for the last several months, all of our evening satsangs and meditations and chats and other things that we've done in the past on our Dancing Shiva YouTube channel. So if you've missed out, or if you want a repeat of what was said tonight, there was a really good one on Guru last week and the week before. So if you want to find those and listen to them again, you can find them on the YouTube channel,
Yeah,
Dancing
and
Shiva YouTube
I
channel.
think the meditations, you can just turn it on and play that and let it and follow the guided meditation. So that's a really handy way to, or sometimes if you want to just change up your meditation and try something different, you can go to YouTube and choose one of the topics we've done meditation on and play it and follow along with it. Great.
And I'll also do a little plug for Dancing Shiva. If you are not on our mailing list or not on our contact list and want to be, do send an email, your information to dancingshivatantra@gmail.com. So it's lovely to see all of you and some new folks, new faces tonight. So thank you so much for all of you that have joined us tonight on Zoom and in person. We have a few folks here in person as well. So we'll see you next week, hopefully. Thank you. You can unmute and say goodnight.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good
night.
night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
And happy birthday again.
Good night, everyone. Good night, Rudyji. Good night, Carol.
Good night.
Good night, Ravi. Happy birthday.